ChatGPT said. The prairie had a silence that could break a person's spirit. Wind slipped across the yellow grass, rattling it like bones, carrying the scent of dust, horse sweat, and storm on the edge of the horizon. In that silence, she stood barefoot in the yard of her in-laws' ranch house, skin raw from her cruelty, heart pounding like a trapped bird. Her husband was long in the ground, claimed by a border skirmish he never should have joined, and she had been left to the mercy of his family. Mercy was a word they did not know. They treated her as little more than a servant, feeding her scraps, taking her labor, and finally, tonight, stripping her of the last thread of dignity she clung to. Her name had almost ceased to matter inside those walls. Once, neighbors called her Clara, soft-voiced girl with laughter that carried across the wheat rows. But in the hands of her husband's kin, she had become little more than the widow, a thing to be owned, a liability to be rid of when convenient. Tonight, under the jaundiced glow of lantern light, they decided her humiliation would be final. Their laughter had been coarse, their eyes glinting with a meanness born of liquor and old spite. They tore at her clothes with the glee of hyenas, certain no one would stop them. But then the door had opened. A shadow filled the threshold, tall and broad-shouldered, the brim of a hat casting his face into darkness. The room froze. The laughter cut short like a knife against throat. His hand rested heavy on the worn grip of a revolver, and his voice was low, gravel dragged over stone. "You're coming with me." The in-laws spat curses, half in shock, half in fury. Clara, trembling, clutched the ragged edges of her torn dress to her chest. She didn't know this man, didn't know why he had come, but in his words there was something she hadn't heard in months: decision, protection, defiance. They shouted that she was theirs to keep, theirs to use, that she had no right to walk out. But the rancher's eyes, sharp and unblinking beneath the shadow of his hat, told them otherwise. His revolver glinted in the lantern light, not raised, not fired, but a promise waiting to be made good. The room stank of sweat and whiskey, yet all she could feel was a cold steel certainty of his words still hanging between them. He didn't wait for their answer. He reached out, strong callous fingers grasping her wrist, pulling her forward through the open door. The night air hit her skin like freedom and fire both. Behind them, the in-laws roared, stumbling for weapons, for vengeance, for any shred of control. But the stranger's stride was long, steady, unstoppable. She stumbled to keep pace, barefoot on the hard earth, each stone biting into her soles, but she clung to him because the alternative was going back. They crossed the yard where the moon spilled silver on the ground. Horses stamped nervously, sensing the storm of violence brewing. A dog barked and was silenced with a sharp whistle from the man. He hoisted her onto a waiting mare, swung into the saddle behind her, and with a sharp kick, the animal lunged into the darkness. Gunfire cracked from the porch, bullets snapping past, but the man didn't flinch. He bent low, his body shielding hers, reins clenched, jaw set. The prairie opened before them, endless and merciless. Clara clung to the menere, hair whipping wild, heart hammering louder than the hooves beneath them. She wanted to scream, to cry, to ask who he was, but the wind stole her voice and fear locked her throat. All she knew was that she had been taken from hell, and whatever this was, whoever this man was, it was different. They rode until the glow of the ranch lights faded behind them, until the shots dwindled into the emptiness of the night. Finally, when the horse slowed, the man pulled them into a copse of cottonwoods, their leaves whispering in the dark. He dismounted first, then lifted her down as though she was something breakable, something precious. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was a mare's breathing and the distant roll of thunder. When at last she found her voice, it came in a ragged whisper. "Why?" His eyes caught the moonlight, pale steel with shadows hiding the rest of his story. "Because I won't watch another soul get crushed." She shivered, wrapping torn cloth tighter around her. The prairie night was cold, colder still after the fevered heat of that house. She didn't know if she could trust him. She didn't know if he meant to save her or use her for some purpose she couldn't yet see. But she knew, deep in her chest, that she couldn't go back. They moved deeper into the trees, settling by a fallen log where the earth still held the day's warmth. He gave her his coat, heavy, smelling of leather, dust, and faint smoke, and she sank into it, clutching the fabric as though it were armor. He didn't ask her name. He didn't offer his. They sat in silence, two strangers bound together by circumstance and something unspoken. The night stretched on, each tick of time straining against her exhaustion. Memories clung like bays. The way her husband-kin had laughed at her pain, the helplessness that had hollowed her out piece by piece. Shame burned hot in her chest, but beneath it was a spark she hadn't felt in months, a strange, dangerous hope. She studied the man in flickers of moonlight. His hands were scarred, knuckles worn from work or war. His jaw was tight, the kind that rarely softened. He sat like someone used to danger, shoulders always aware, back never truly resting. Something haunted him. She could see it even without words. Perhaps that was why he had acted, because ghosts drove him as much as hers did. At last, exhaustion dragged her eyes shut, though fear kept her from slipping fully into sleep. She leaned against a log, listening to the steady rustle of leaves, the shift of his boots as he kept watch. He was a stranger, a dangerous one, but danger had saved her tonight. Morning would bring pursuit. She knew her in-laws wouldn't stop. Their pride was wounded, their control broken, and men like them didn't forgive such wounds. They'd come with horses, with rifles, with rage enough to burn the prairie down. She knew it, and she suspected he knew it too. Yet as the wind curled through the trees and his quiet presence stood between her and the dark, Clara let herself believe, just for that moment, that maybe there was a way forward. Not a path without danger, not a life without scars, but something beyond the cage she'd been forced to live in. When her eyes finally closed, the last thing she heard was his voice, low and certain, carrying a weight that felt both promise and warning. "You're safe for now, but the world won't let us be." And with those words, the silence of the prairie returned, vast and unforgiving, holding secrets still to come. The dawn broke with a bruised sky. Clouds stretched like torn cloth across the horizon, and the prairie carried the chill of night into morning. Clara awoke shivering, wrapped in the stranger's heavy coat, its leather stiffness cradling her as though it belonged to someone else's life entirely. Her body ached, her throat raw, but it was a silence that gnawed most, silence thick enough to remind her that what had happened the night before had not been some fever dream. She opened her eyes to find him already awake, crouched by the embers of a dying fire, feeding it with dry twigs. His movements were precise, economical, the kind of efficiency that came from years of repetition. He did not look at her, not at first. The horse was tethered nearby, snorting softly, stamping at the earth as if it, too, carried some awareness of the dangers waiting beyond the trees. Clara hugged the coat closer, the memory of torn clothes pressing against her skin like phantom hands. Shame pricked at her as keenly as a cold, but there was no pity in his gaze when he finally glanced over, only an unreadable measure, as though weighing whether she had the will to continue. "We can't stay," he said simply. His voice was gravel low, stripped of ornament. "They'll be riding at first light." Clara swallowed, her lips dry. She wanted to ask who he was, why he had done what no one else dared, but the question stuck. Something about his presence, hard, steady, coiled like a spring, made words feel dangerous. Instead, she nodded, her silence an agreement born of necessity. They broke camp swiftly, his hands moving with practiced ease, Hayes fumbling clumsily until he passed her a canteen with the faintest flicker of impatience. She drank greedily, the water cold and sharp, reminding her that her body was still her own, still alive. He led the horse out from the cottonwoods, gestured for her to mount first, then swung up behind her with a sure-footed grace. The weight of him was both comfort and cage, and as the horse surged forward into the rolling grassland, Clara felt every heartbeat echo with fear. The land stretched wide, endless in its emptiness, and soon she understood the true cruelty of freedom. It meant exposure. There were no walls to shield her, no ceilings to hide beneath, only the vast eye of the sky watching their flight. The sun climbed, baking the earth, and every shadow felt like threat. He rode with eyes always scanning, his hand never far from a revolver at his hip. She could not tell if the tension was for her sake or his own, but she clung to it all the same. By midday, hunger gnawed at her, sharp as teeth. They stopped near a dry creek bed, its stones bleached by years of sun. He pulled a small satchel from the saddle, offered her a strip of jerky. The salt burned her cracked lips, but she ate as though starved, which, in truth, she was. He chewed slowly, gaze fixed on the horizon, and the silence between them thickened with every passing minute. You didn't have to save me, she managed at last, voice ragged. His eyes cut to hers, pale as steel, unflinching. Didn't have to, he echoed, then shrugged. But I did. It was no explanation, but it was more than she expected. She wanted to ask again, why, what debt, what ghost haunted him, but his stare made it clear the answers would not come easy. She looked away, the taste of salt and smoke still on her tongue, and told herself not to press further. That night, the wolves came. They had made camp beneath a bluff, the horse tethered close, the fire burning small and mean. Clara drifted into uneasy sleep, but the sound of low growls woke her, a shiver running up her spine before her eyes opened. Yellow eyes gleamed beyond the firelight, shifting shadows circling in the dark. Her breath hitched, throat tight with terror. He was already moving, rifle in hand, body taut with readiness. The wolves crept closer, drawn by the scent of meat, by the weakness they thought they smelled in the two figures by the flames. Clara pressed against the rock face, her chest pounding, watching him step forward with calm precision. He fired once, the crack splitting the night, the bullet kicking up dirt near the lead wolf. The pack froze, snarling, teeth flashing. He held steady, firelight cutting harsh lines across his face, and fired again. This time the shot clipped fur, a warning more than a kill. The wolves retreated slowly, whining, disappearing back into the blackness. Her hands trembled, her whole body shaking with the raw immediacy of death just beyond reach. He turned to her, eyes unreadable in the flicker of flame. "They'll keep their distance now," he said. She tried to speak, but no sound came. All she could do was nod, clutching the coat tighter, as though the memory of safety could protect her from the fear still crawling beneath her skin. Days blurred together. The prairie was unrelenting. Dust storms rising like wolves, nights that froze the marrow in her bones, sun that seared the skin until it cracked. Her body weakened, blistered feet stumbling when they walked beside the horse despaired. Yet with every hardship endured, she felt something inside harden too, a small ember of strength that had not existed before. He rarely spoke. His silence was heavy but not cruel, and sometimes it carried more weight than words ever could. When she faltered climbing a ridge, he offered a hand without comment. When she couldn't stomach the dried meat, he handed her a wild root he had dug from the earth. And once, when her sobs shook her frame in the dead of night, he did not look at her, did not try to soothe with lies, but simply tossed another log on the fire and kept watch until she calmed. It was on the 5th day that they found the trail. Hoof prints, fresh, pressed deep into the dirt. Clara crouched beside them, heart hammering as she traced the indentations with shaking fingers. Her in-laws were close. The thought made a rise in her throat. "They won't stop," she whispered. "No," he agreed. His hand rested on the revolver, eyes scanning the empty sweep of land. "Men like that never do." Her breath hitched, panic fluttering at the edges of her chest. "Then we can't outrun them forever." He looked at her then, steady and unflinching. "We don't need to outrun them. We just need to outlast them." It was not comfort, not really, but something in his tone steadied her all the same. That night, while he scouted the perimeter, Clara sat by the fire alone, the sky wide and starlit above her. The loneliness pressed against her ribs, but in it she found a strange clarity. She thought of her husband, his smile before war stole him, the life they had once imagined, rows of corn, children's laughter, quiet evenings by a warm hearth. That dream had died with him, and in its place had grown rotten cruelty. But here, in this brutal wilderness, something new was forming. Not peace, not safety, but the bare beginnings of resilience. When he returned, a faint shadow trailing behind him, she saw another figure moving in the distance. Her heart leapt in terror until the firelight revealed him fully, a man, lean and sharp-eyed, skin bronzed by sun, clad in buckskin and beads. A bow hung across his back, a knife at his belt. Clara's breath caught. The stranger approached with deliberate slowness, his gaze flicking from her to the man who had saved her. No words were exchanged at first. The air was tense, thick as rope pulled taut. The two men regarded each other, measuring, calculating. At last, the newcomer spoke, voice low, accented by a tongue that shaped English like stone warmed by water. "You ride loud. You leave sign." The rancher's jaw tightened. "Not for you." The other tilted his head, eyes narrowing. For them, then, they are close. Clara's stomach turned. She wanted to speak, to ask if he meant her in-laws, but the weight of their stays silenced her. The air buzzed with unspoken history between these two men, one born of the frontier, one shaped by it. Neither trusted, neither yielded. Finally, the stranger moved closer to the fire, squatted low, and warmed his hands. I walk alone. You ride with trouble. Trouble draws blood. The rancher said nothing. His silence was answer enough. Clara sat rigid, torn between fear and fragile hope. Perhaps this man would betray them. Perhaps he would help. The uncertainty was unbearable. When she finally met the stranger's eyes, she saw no cruelty there, only calculation. And something else, something that flickered almost like recognition. He inclined his head slightly, as though acknowledging her presence at last, and in that small gesture she felt a thread of trust forming, delicate as a spider's web. The fire crackled between them, three souls bound by the wilderness, by danger, by necessity. The night pressed in, heavy with the promise of pursuit. Clara wrapped the coat tighter, the stranger's quiet eyes still on her, the rancher's steady watch holding them all in tense balance. For the first time since her escape, she did not feel entirely alone. And though she did not yet know whether that would save her or damn her, she sensed that the choice would soon no longer be hers to make. The storm came before dawn, rolling across the plains with a voice like cannon fire. Thunder shook the ground beneath their camp, lightning split the sky, and rain hammered down in sheets so heavy it blurred the horizon. Clara sat hunched beneath the rancher's coat, soaked through, shivering as a cold bit into her bones. The native warrior crouched nearby, motionless despite the deluge, his sharp eyes turned east as though he could see through the veil of storm. The rancher paced like a restless wolf, revolver checked and rechecked, shoulders set in iron tension. They all knew the storm would not keep their pursuers away. It would only cloak their approach. Clara's heart thudded with dread. For days they had fled, crossing ridges, fording rivers, slipping through ravines, but always a hoof prints followed, always the echo of pursuit lingered behind them. The in-laws were coming, dragging hired guns with them, men with greed and cruelty in their eyes. She could feel it in her chest, the way prey senses a predator even when it cannot see. And she knew, though none of them said it aloud, that the end was close. When dawn bled pale behind the storm clouds, the rancher stopped pacing. He stood at the edge of the trees, hat dripping water, jaw clenched like stone. "They'll reach us by midday," he said. His voice was calm, but there was no hiding the finality of it. "We can't outrun them anymore." Clara's breath caught, a knot of terror clawing at her throat. She thought of that night in the house, of laughter like knives cutting her apart, of shame burning hotter than fire. She thought of wolves circling in the dark, of hunger gnawing until she thought she'd vanish into dust. She had survived it all, but now the thought of being dragged back broke her from the inside. "What do we do?" she whispered. The rancher's gaze shifted to the warrior. No words passed, but understanding flickered in the silence. The warrior inclined his head slowly, his eyes glinting with something between defiance and fatalism. "We fight," the rancher said at last. Clara's stomach turned, fear surging like the storm still muttering overhead. She had never held a gun, never imagined lifting steel and powder against another soul, but she understood that choice was gone. Her in-laws had stripped her of everything, home, dignity, freedom, and if they caught her now, they would strip the rest. Death would be kinder. She nodded, though her hands shook so badly she pressed them into mud to steady herself. They set about preparing. The warrior vanished into the rain and returned with branches, weaving them into a crude barricade across the mouth of the gully where they had camped. The rancher checked the terrain, gauging angles, choosing where each of them would stand. He gave Clara a revolver, old but oiled, the handle worn smooth. She held it awkwardly, the weight dragging at her arm. "You'll have to use it," he said, his eyes locked on hers. "When the time comes, don't hesitate." Her throat dried. "What if I miss?" "Then fire again," he said simply. The warrior watched them both, silent, unreadable, before finally speaking. "Fear is good. It keeps your eyes open. But when the moment comes, you must not think of fear. Think of breath. Think of life." His words lodged deep in her chest, strange and steadying. She practiced lifting the revolver, sighting down the barrel, though her hands trembled so badly she nearly dropped it. The rancher placed his hand over Hayes, steadying her aim, his touch firm but not unkind. "Breathe," he said. "Always breathe first." The hours bled away in damp silence. The rain eased, but the clouds lingered heavy. Birds fell quiet, as though the earth itself waited. Clara sat against the barricade, revolver in her lap, staring into the distance until her eyes burned. Memories rose unbidden. Her husband smiled before war took him, the fields they'd planned to plant, the home they'd meant to build. That life was ashes now, blown into the wind. Ahead lay only fire and blood. And yet, beneath the fear, a spark of defiance kindled. She would not be dragged back. She would not be broken again. By midday, hoofbeats came. They rolled across the prairie like thunder, shaking the ground, filling the air with dread. Clara's breath seized in her chest. The rancher crouched low behind the barricade, rifle braced, eyes narrow. The warrior notched an arrow, his bow drawn with effortless grace. Clara's palm sweated, the revolver slick in her hands. The riders appeared through the mist, half a dozen at least, their shapes dark against the gray sky. At their head rode her eldest brother-in-law, face twisted with hate, rifle gleaming across his saddle. His voice carried across the gully, cruel and mocking. "Give her back, and maybe we'll let you walk away. Stranger." Clara flinched, but the rancher didn't move, didn't answer. His silence was more cutting than words. The in-laws shouted again, threats spitting into the wind, but still the rancher held steady, waiting. The air stretched thin as wire. Then the first rider spurred his horse forward, charging into the gully. The rancher fired. The crack split the air, the rider tumbled from his saddle, and chaos erupted. Gunfire thundered, arrows hissed, horses screamed. Clara ducked behind the barricade, heart hammering so loud she thought it might drown the world. Splinters flew as bullets chewed into wood. The warrior loosed arrow after arrow, each one finding its mark with deadly precision. The rancher moved like a machine, calm, deliberate, every shot purposeful. Clara's turn came too soon. A man broke through, rushing the barricade with a knife gleaming in his fist. Her scream tore from her throat as she lifted the revolver, firing blind. The shot went wide, earth kicking up at his feet. He snarled, closing the distance. She fired again, the recoil jolting her arm, and this time the bullet struck. The man collapsed inches from her, the knife clattering from his grip. Her whole body shook, bile rising in her throat, but she forced herself not to drop the gun. The battle raged. Smoke stung her eyes, the air thick with powder and blood. Men screamed, horses reared. The earth itself seemed to convulse beneath the violence. Clara fired until the revolver clicked empty, then fumbled to reload with trembling hands. The rancher was bleeding from his shoulder, but he kept fighting, teeth bared in grim determination. The warrior fought like wind and fire, never still, never faltering. At last, the gunfire thinned. One by one, the pursuers fell or fled, their shouts dwindling into the distance. Only her eldest brother-in-law remained, staggering forward with madness in his eyes, blood seeping from a wound at his side. His gaze locked on Clara, hatred burning hotter than pain. "You'll never be free," he spat. "You're ours. You'll always be ours." Something inside her snapped. Clara stepped forward, revolver raised, her hand steady for the first time. She looked into his eyes and saw every cruelty, every humiliation, every moment he had tried to break her, and she fired. The shot echoed, final, cutting through the silence left by the battle. He fell, his body crumpling into the mud. Clara stood frozen, chest heaving, the revolver lowering slowly as the reality of it sank into her bones. She had killed him. She had ended it herself. The gully fell quiet. The rancher leaned against the barricade, blood darkening his shirt, his face pale but resolute. The warrior retrieved his last arrow, silent as ever, his eyes catching Clara's in a long, unreadable stare. For a moment, none of them moved, bound together by the weight of what had been done. Finally, the warrior slung his bow, stepped back from the fire-blackened earth. Without a word, he turned toward the horizon. Clara's voice cracked when she tried to call after him, but he did not stop. He walked into the fading storm, swallowed by the prairie, leaving nothing but the memory of his presence. The rancher pushed himself upright, wincing, his breath ragged. Clara rushed to him, pressing her hands against the wound, tears blurring her sight. "You can't leave me," she whispered, desperate. He met her gaze, pain etched deep, and shook his head. "I won't stay," he said, voice soft but certain. "This was never my fight. I just couldn't watch." Her heart cracked, but she saw the truth in his eyes. He was a man burdened by ghosts, by scars that would never heal, a man who could not lay roots. She wanted to beg, to plead, but she knew it would be selfish. He had given her freedom, and that had to be enough. When at last he mounted his horse, swaying slightly from the wound, Clara stood in the wreckage, mud clinging to her torn dress, revolver heavy at her side. He tipped his hat once, a gesture both farewell and blessing, then rode away into the endless prairie. Alone, Clara looked at the body strewn in the gully, at the blood soaking into the earth, at the sky clearing overhead. She was no longer the girl who had been dragged down by cruelty, stripped of her name and her will. She was something new, forged in fire and fay. The prairie was vast, merciless, but it was hers now, and she would endure. As the wind whispered through the grass and the sun broke the storm, Clara whispered into the silence, not to him, not to anyone, but to herself, "I am free." And for the first time in too long, she believed it.